previous video, we explored what the term breaking even actually means and how the break-even point, the number of units that need to be sold so that the business can break even, can be calculated. We also looked at how to work out the margin of safety given a certain number of units, which is an important skill, and it basically allows the entrepreneur to work out their safety net. If you have not yet watched the first video introducing break-even analysis, I would suggest that you go back and start there. But now, we're going to look at how to interpret a break-even chart. As a reminder, the break-even point is where a business makes no profit and they make no loss. They make zero profits. Break-even analysis tells us how many items a business has to sell to get to a point where costs and revenues will be equal. A common way to show the break-even point is on a chart. So let's have a look at an example. You can see along the bottom on the horizontal axis, on the x-axis, that we have the number of units produced and sold. On the y-axis, the vertical axis, we have the sales revenue and the costs. And you'll see that there are 3 lines on this chart. So let's look at each of these lines in turn and explain what they mean. To all the teachers out there, show all of these videos without any ads and gain access to our growing library of over 500 teaching worksheets. Why not visit BizzWizard.co.uk to find out more? So, the blue line shows the fixed costs. You'll see that this line is completely horizontal. It's not going up and it's not going down. And that's because, as you probably already know, fixed costs do not change with the level of output, with the amount produced or sold. Even at 0 units produced, a business still has fixed costs, such as rent, salaries, and energy bills that must be paid. Now, the green line shows total costs. As we know, total costs are fixed costs plus variable costs. Most of the time we don't plot the variable cost line on this chart. We just have our fixed cost line that we just looked at, and we have this green total costs line. As a quick reminder though, variable costs, as the name suggests, vary according to the level of output. So if 0 units are produced, then variable costs will be 0. If you think of a sandwich shop, the variable costs would be the bread, the butter, the sandwich ingredients, maybe even the packaging for the sandwich. For every single sandwich sold, these costs would go up. If no sandwiches are sold, then there would be no variable costs. And this is why the total costs line and the fixed cost line start at the same place. If you look closely, you see that the total cost line starts from the same point as the fixed cost line on the y-axis. And this is because even at 0 units produced, you will still have to pay those fixed costs. Those costs that are hanging over your head. Those costs that must be paid, which might be why we sometimes refer to these as overheads. Finally, this red line shows total sales revenue, total income from sales. And we know that sales revenue increases as the number of units sold increases. As we sell more, we make more revenue. And if no units are sold, then sales revenue will be equal to, well, 0. And that's why this line starts at 0 and it slopes upwards as the units sold increases. Okay, at this point we know that total costs and total revenue are the most important numbers for break-even analysis, because the break-even point is where total costs equal total revenue. Nothing has been made and nothing has been lost. On this chart you'll see a pink dot where the green line, the total cost line, and the red line, the total sales revenue line, cross over, where they intersect. And this is the point where total costs equal total revenue. In other words, this is the break-even point. Once you have found this important point, you can then draw a vertical line down to the x-axis to read off the number of units sold at that break-even point. And this, as we know from the last video, is called the break-even output. And this shows the business owner the number of units that they need to produce and sell so that they will make just enough revenue to cover their total costs. To break even. If a business owner knows this information, then they can use it to help set themselves targets, or so that they don't end up losing money. The break-even chart can also be used to show us some other interesting bits of information that might be useful to the entrepreneur. Okay, so on this chart, what is the actual output? Well, the actual output stops where the sales revenue line stops. So in this example, if we draw a dotted line down, you'll see that that now appears on the chart just to the right of the break-even output, and we will label that the actual output. So now you can see that anything between the total costs line and the sales revenue line that is over to the right of the break-even point, well, this shows that the business is making a profit. And anything to the left of that important break-even point shows that that business would be making a loss. Now, we saw in the last video that the margin of safety is the amount produced over and above the break-even point. So on this chart, the margin of safety is shown as the gap between the break-even output and the actual output that we have just plotted. Remember from the previous video that the output could actually fall by anything within this margin of safety before the business starts to make a loss. Okay, so we can also use this important chart to work out the profit, or maybe the loss, at a particular level of output. In our example, the actual output is to the right of the break-even point. So that tells us that this business is profitable. Their actual output is above their break-even point. They are producing and selling more than they need to break even. And we can see that they have a margin of safety. We know that profit equals total sales revenue, take away total costs. And conveniently, these are the two lines that we have plotted. So we can work out the profit at a particular output level by looking at the gap between the red line, the total revenue line, and the green line, the total costs line. And this profit figure, as you can see, is now highlighted on the chart. Now, you can see that the gap between these two lines to the right of this break-even point, well, the gap gets bigger as the output increases. In other words, as the output increases, as more is produced and sold, then the profits also increase. If the output sold was actually to the left of the break-even point, on the other side, well, this would mean that they're making a loss. We could calculate the amount of money lost by looking at the gap between, again, the green total costs line and the red total revenue line. As you can see on this side, the gap between the two lines to the left of the break-even point gets narrower as output increases. So in other words, as output increases and it gets closer to that break-even point, the amount of loss gets smaller and smaller until eventually there is no loss. And as we know, that is that break-even point. Bring this video and over 100 more to life with fun, interactive games, quizzes, and case studies. Why not try the first 25 completely free by visiting BizzWizard.co.uk. Okay, so you should now have a pretty solid understanding of what a break-even analysis is and how to interpret a break-even chart. It's now time to look at a worked example to improve our understanding. To do this, let's meet Yaz Osman. Yaz has always loved to bake, and she has an exciting idea to sell luxury cake presented in beautiful gift jars. Before getting started, to sense check whether her business idea was even feasible, Yaz decided to pull together a break-even chart as she's seen that this is a good way of representing her break-even point and the profit and loss at different levels of output in a visual way. So, Yaz plans to charge £5 per cake jar and has calculated that her variable costs per jar, per product, will be £3. She predicts that her fixed costs will be £30,000, and this includes the rent of her bakery premises, insurance, and fuel costs. She's forecasting that she will sell 20,000 units, 20,000 cake jars in her first year of trading. Yaz plots all of this information onto the break-even chart. Let's have a look at this and interpret what it's showing. So, the blue line shows fixed costs of £30,000. Even if Yaz doesn't sell a single cake jar, she will still have fixed costs such as rent. Fixed costs don't change with output, which is why this line is horizontal, and it stays at £30,000 for all different levels of output. Now, the green line shows total costs. The total costs, as we know, are the fixed costs plus the variable costs. So as output increases, so do variable costs. It's £3 for every cake jar that Yaz produces, and that's why the total cost line slopes upwards as the number of units gets bigger. And then there's the red line in the chart, which shows the total forecasted sales revenue. Sales revenue increases as the number of cake jars sold increases, and if no units are sold, then sales revenue will be zero. There will be no money coming into the business. And that's why this line starts at 0, and it slopes upwards as the units sold increase by £5 per cake jar sold. Each of the video courses over at BizzWizard.co.uk also includes an interactive business case study that applies the knowledge learnt to a real-world scenario. There are over 1,000 multiple-choice questions, each with detailed feedback, which test students' understanding of the content. Why not visit BizzWizard.co.uk to find out more? Okay, so on the chart you'll now see a pink dot where the green line, the total costs line, and the red line, the total sales revenue line, cross, where they intersect. And this is the point where Yaz's total costs equal total revenue. In other words, it's that break-even point. And you can then draw a vertical line down to the x-axis to read off the number of units sold at that break-even point. So how many cake jars does Yaz have to sell to make no profit but make no loss? And this is called the break-even output, and as you can see in this scenario, it's 15,000 units. Now, you can check this information that you've taken from the chart by working out the profit that Yaz will make if she sells 15,000 units. We covered this in the last video. We know that the profit is total revenue minus total costs. At 15,000 units, then the total revenue is £5 times by 15,000 cake jars, which makes £75,000. We know that the fixed costs are £30,000. We know that the variable cost per jar is £3. So £3 times by 15,000 cake jars, well, that comes to variable costs of £45,000. So the total costs here are 30,000 plus 45,000, which makes £75,000. So the profit, when we take £75,000 of sales revenue and we have £75,000 worth of costs, well, that equals £0, which is just what we was expecting. So in other words, total revenue equals total costs. And this shows us that Yaz does need to produce and sell 15,000 cake jars so that she makes just enough revenue to cover her total costs. Now, luckily Yaz has actually predicted that she will sell more than this. She now adds to the chart her forecasted sales of 20,000 cake jars. So the expected sales of 20,000 units is to the right of the break-even output, which as we know shows that Yaz is expecting to make a profit. Now, if Yaz was only expecting to sell 5,000 units, for example, this would be to the left of that break-even output, and this would mean that she was expecting her business to make a loss. Now we know that the margin of safety is the amount produced over and above the break-even point. We can see on this chart that Yaz's margin of safety is the gap between the break-even output and the expected output. Yaz's margin of safety is 20,000 units that she actually expects to sell minus 15,000 units that she needs to sell to break even, and this gives her a margin of safety of 5,000 units. So this means that Yaz's output could fall by up to 5,000 units below her predictions before she actually starts to make a loss. Okay, this is all well and good, but this chart can do a little more. The chart can help Yaz to calculate her profit. Yaz has predicted that she's going to sell 20,000 cake jars, and this means that her business is forecast to be profitable. And we know that profit is total sales revenue minus total costs. So we can work out the profit at Yaz's predicted output level of 20,000 units by looking at the gap between the red total revenue and the green total costs line. At 20,000 units, we can see that Yaz's total revenue on the chart, on the red line, goes up to £100,000. At 20,000 units, we can also see that Yaz's total costs on the chart, the green line, are £90,000. And the difference between these two figures is £10,000, and this is £10,000 of profit that Yaz is expecting to make. You can now see that this has been highlighted on the chart and that the size of this gap is £10,000. Remember that the gap between the two lines to the right of the break-even point, well, it gets bigger as output increases. In other words, as Yaz's output increases, as she sells more and more cake jars, well, her profits are going to increase, and they're going to get bigger and bigger. So, this has been a pretty long topic to get our heads around. There are many advantages and disadvantages of using a break-even chart, but they're all pretty similar to the advantages and disadvantages that we discussed in the previous video, so we're not going to go over them again. But the most important thing that you must remember is that the accuracy of the break-even chart, well, that depends on the accuracy of the predicted data used, on the predicted prices, the predicted variable costs, and the predicted fixed costs, and that this is often less predictable for a new business that hasn't actually started up yet. And this is why it's so important to have that margin of safety, so that if any one of these variables changes, well, there's more chance for the business to remain profitable. So, in conclusion, you can interpret a lot of information from a break-even chart, including break-even output, the margin of safety, and the expected levels of profit or loss at different levels of output. You need to make sure that you feel comfortable with drawing a break-even chart when you are given a set of data for a business, and that you know how to interpret it once it has been created. It's really important to make sure that you plot the information accurately and that you sense check the figures that you read off the graph by calculating them using the formula for break-even point, the margin of safety, and for calculating profit, all of which we've looked at in previous videos. And that's everything that you need to know about a break-even chart. So until the next time, this has been the BizzWizard. See you in the next video.